This is Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor during the 119th Congress. On May 12th, Thune criticized Democrats for obstructing President Trump's cabinet nominees at unprecedented levels, warning Republicans would continue to confirm them the hard way. The following material is protected by copyright.
Mr. President, before I begin, I want to mention longtime Supreme Court Justice David Souter, who died on Thursday. My thoughts and prayers are with his family and loved ones. I also want to mention Cardinal Robert Prevost, who on Thursday became Pope Leo XIV. And I want to extend my congratulations on his election and my prayers for his service. I know that his election is particularly moving for American Catholics, who for the first time in history will be led by an American-born Pope. I'm very happy for them, and I look forward to seeing what this son of the Midwest brings to the Catholic Church and to the world. Mr. President, on Thursday afternoon, Democrats abruptly ended extensive bipartisan work on the Genius Act and filibustered the Senate's attempt to move this bill. Democrats, I should say, who had voted for the bill in committee, inexplicably chose to vote against it here on the Senate floor. Mr. President, that's pretty difficult to understand. Providing a regulatory framework for stablecoins is a bipartisan issue. The bill is the product of a bipartisan negotiation. And the vote in the Banking Committee was definitely bipartisan, which leads you to wonder, of course, if this was really about the bill at all, or if this was about wanting to deny President Trump, or Republicans more generally, a legislative victory. Which might be nice for Democrats, but leaves stablecoin issuers and Americans who use stablecoins in the same difficult spot that they're currently in. But unfortunately, it's pretty clear that obstructing, not legislating, is the Democrats' priority right now. Mr. President, until Democrats come to their senses and allow us to proceed to the Genius Act, we're going to turn to nominations, another area where, unfortunately, Democrats have made obstruction the name of the game. I certainly understand that Democrats are not going to support all the president's nominees. That's their prerogative as senators. But the way that they are drawing out this process on even non-controversial nominations is serving no one. 57 out of the 58 of the president's civilian nominees have required cloture votes, an unprecedented number for recent administrations. And of those 57 nominees, 17 received 60 or more votes in support on their final confirmation vote. In other words, support from a number of Democrats as well as Republicans. And yet, Democrats dragged out those nominations in the same way they dragged out the nominations of individuals that they universally opposed. Not a single one of President Trump's civilian nominees has been confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote. Again, something entirely unprecedented in recent years. No other president, since at least 1977, has failed to have civilian nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote at this point of his administration, except for President Trump in his first term in office. And as I said, this is serving no one, Mr. President. Nor is this going to prevent the president's nominees from getting confirmed. Democrats can drag out nominations all they want, but we're going to fill out the president's administration and ensure that his nominees get into place so that they can do the job and that he can do the job that he was elected to do. I'd like to do this easy way and confirm non-controversial nominees expeditiously, in batches, for example, and maybe even by unanimous consent. That would give us more time to legislate and give members more time to spend in their states. But if we have to do this the hard way, we will. We're going to get the president's team in place. So I guess, Mr. President, Democrats have some decisions to make. I really hope, that they'll come back to the table on the Genius Act. And I hope that they will cease their pointless obstruction of bipartisan nominees. But I guess we'll have to see.
For his part, Schumer discussed a Hamas hostage released back to the United States, President Trump accepting a plane from Qatar to act as Air Force One, tariffs, Medicaid, and more.
So first, Madam President, today we've heard some very good news. Idon Alexander, an American-Israeli and New Jersey native, has finally been freed from Hamas's brutal captivity and reunited with his family. I first met Idon's parents, Adi and Yael, right after October 7th, a few days later, when Idon was taken hostage by Hamas. For the last 583 days, Adi and Yael have fought tirelessly for Idon's release. Today, that work pays off as they finally get to hug their son again. Idon's release gives me more hope and motivation to keep pushing for the release of all 58 hostages still in Hamas's captivity, including the remains of 4 New Yorkers brutally murdered by Hamas: Omar Nutra, Itai Chen, Gad Haggai, and Judy Weinstein. They were brutally killed, but their remains should be sent back. But of course, Hamas, as brutal as they are, doesn't do that yet. As the President departs to the Middle East, I call on him and his administration to use the full weight of U.S. diplomatic power to get a deal to bring all the hostages home. I'll continue working as long as it takes to finally bring every last hostage, including the remains of hostages no longer with us, home at last. Now on Qatar. Yesterday, reports came out that the royal family of Qatar is set to gift Donald Trump a luxury 747 to use as his own Air Force One. Without a shred of shame, Donald Trump will lecture families about putting up with higher prices that he himself triggered and then accept a $400 million private jet from the Qatari royal family. His shameless self-enrichment is without equal in American history. You cannot think of another president who has been so brazen, so selfish, and so destructive of the norms of what America is about. In truth, though, the news of the Qatari Air Force is just one tip of the iceberg. For months, Qatar and other Gulf state nationals have spent billions on deals with the Trump organizations to buy the president. Donald Trump is using his office to enrich himself and his family. This isn't a question. This is a fact with incredible supporting data to prove it. He is putting America's national security at risk to enrich himself. Just as concerning as the very gift are the national security implications that surround it, the deeply chilling part of this drive and national security betrayal from the president is just how blatant and erroneous what he's doing. Almost daring Republicans to stand up to him, defend our country. Daring Republicans. So where are our Republican friends with this kind of egregious, grubby, awful self-enrichment? Silence, total obedience. On tariffs. Early this morning, it was reported that Donald Trump caved to Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party with virtually nothing to show for American workers. Donald Trump has changed his mind once again on his tariffs with a new deal with China to pause most tariffs for 90 days. Sadly, it looks like China has once again gotten the better of Donald Trump. They've hardly had to give up a thing. It's another example of Donald Trump's chaos. Trump has one policy for his tariffs on one day, a different policy the next day. One day he's pretending to be a tough guy with China. The next day he's caving to China and getting little, if anything, in return. Who knows what Trump's tariff policy will be in the next 90 days? If I were a business person, I wouldn't count on what he's doing or what he says today that probably won't be in effect in the next week or the next 3 weeks. And even under this deal, tariffs are still significantly higher than they were before Trump's Liberation Day. Businesses will continue to struggle. Supply chains will continue to experience chaos, strain, and unpredictability. And again, this is only a 90-day pause. It's impossible, as I said before, it's impossible to predict what will happen next, even within the 90-day period, because Donald Trump changes his mind so quickly. Whatever seems in front of him at the moment, he goes for. First, he's mad at China, puts in the tariffs. Then he gets lots of blowback, backs off. Where will he be tomorrow? Who the heck knows? But businesses can't count on any reliability. only on chaos. Donald Trump's trade war is a lose-lose-lose for American families and businesses, leaving them with increased costs and more chaos. On drug pricing. A few hours ago, Donald Trump signed a new executive order he claims will, quote, almost immediately bring down the costs of prescription drugs. Americans should hold their applause because Donald Trump's announcement is little more than a photo op masquerading as reform. Just as he said he'd bring down costs on day one and it didn't happen, same thing here, almost immediately. Give me a break. In case Donald Trump is forgotten, this announcement is like what he already tried to do in 2020 with little success. So Americans are right to be skeptical until they actually see their prescription drug costs go down more. Donald Trump can say he's doing an executive order, but we all know the odds are overwhelming that that executive order will fail. The real way to make drug prices reform happen is to do what Democrats do and what Donald Trump is loath to do. Roll up your sleeves and do the hard work of passing legislation. That's what we did. That's why insulin's $35 for senior citizens. That's why 20 of the most widely used drugs prices have plummeted because we've negotiated with Medicare. That's why no family pays more than $2,000 total for all their prescription drugs. We worked hard, we legislated, we got prices down. Donald Trump does a photo op, says it's going to come down immediately, but obviously this is a half-baked political stunt that is unlikely to bring any meaningful change. Today's announcement is so typical of Donald Trump's presidency. He promises a golden age, but in reality, Americans get fool's gold. On the recon bill text. Yesterday, Republicans released the text of their plan to eviscerate Medicaid while cutting taxes for the ultra-rich. The bill is as toxic as we all feared. With a straight face, Republicans are telling the American people they want to cut taxes for the ultra-rich by trillions of dollars and pay for it with the biggest cuts to Medicaid ever, the biggest cuts to Medicaid ever. If this bill becomes law, nearly 14 million Americans will lose their health insurance. Again, the biggest cut to Medicaid in American history. 14 million people losing their health insurance. Hospital after hospital will have to lay off tens of thousands of workers. Many of them may be forced to close, particularly in rural areas. Republicans promised for months they would protect Medicaid, but now Americans know the truth. Republicans never intended to keep that promise, and this confirms it. Almost 14 million Americans lose insurance. Millions more see their premiums go up. Hospitals from one end of America to the other will close. Thousands will lose their jobs. Millions will lose their access to health care. Kids will suffer. Seniors suffer. Health care workers lose their jobs. Americans with disabilities get hurt. Rural Americans are left to fend for themselves. Hospitals and nursing homes will shutter. States will scramble with their budgets. American families are left out to dry. And why? Tax cuts for the billionaires. That's what happens when Project 2025 takes over the Republican mainstream. But the cruelness doesn't stop there. Later today, we also expect Republicans to unveil their plan to cut SNAP, which feeds about 40 million Americans in need. If the Republicans are to be believed, Republicans plan to cut federal food assistance by hundreds of billions. That's if the reports are to be believed. That's what the Republicans plan to do. Kids will go hungry. Parents will suffer. I just got back from Buffalo and Albany in upstate New York, meeting with food banks and religious leaders, church leaders who are on the front lines of the fight against hunger. The priests and nuns I met spoke of the obligation that Scripture imparts on us to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty. But right now, Republicans want to rob the least of our neighbors to make it better for those at the top. SNAP should not be a partisan issue. It should not be a political issue. It's a moral question. Are we going to let kids, veterans, senior citizens, and others go hungry? This is about taking care of the most vulnerable in society, especially the children, making sure every child in America is afforded basic dignity. If a kid goes to bed hungry, they can't learn the next morning in school. They can't get along with their friends. They're off to an awful start. So SNAP has been one of the great things that America has done until now in a bipartisan way, but not with these MAGA people running the show and not with the Republicans here in the Senate and in the House being supine to what they know is wrong and vicious and mean and counterproductive. I urge House Republicans to oppose these devastating cuts to SNAP, particularly those New York Republicans whose constituents I've met over the past couple of weeks. I was in or near the districts of two of them today, and the outrage against what they might do was palpable. Given the narrow margins in the House, these swing districts in New York have the power to stop these cuts to SNAP. These Republicans can do it. They can make sure no kid goes to bed hungry. I urge them to stand up and hold the line. When you put it all together, there's no other way to put it. This bill is a grotesque betrayal of working and middle-class families. And a few moments ago, Republicans released their next phase of their plan, hiking taxes on electricity and raising energy costs for seniors and families. Republicans are so captured by the hard-right ideology that they're willing to cede America's energy future to China and tank domestic industries that will need to keep energy costs low in the future. Not a single Senate Democrat will support this destructive piece of legislation. Instead of calling this one big beautiful bill, Republicans should tell the truth. This bill is a big fat grift, and it's the American people who are getting ripped off. Finally, I want to say a little about last week. There are those on the other side of the aisle now shedding crocodile tears that last week the minority asserted its right not to proceed to a bill that has zero legislative text. Imagine, they said, the nerve of the Democrats not voting for a bill when there's no text. How crazy can they be? We asserted our rights very simply to continue the legislative process, to allow time to reach agreement. The majority, in an act of political stubbornness but also stupidity, asked people to vote on a bill they had never seen. They tried to force a vote before senators even had text to know what they were voting on. And then they get upset that we all voted no? They shouldn't be surprised. Least of all, my good friend, the Republican leader, who said in his first speech as majority leader, said, "One of my priorities as leader will be to ensure that the Senate stays the Senate." Well, in the Senate, we've always had a text of bill before we vote on it. I'd say that to my friend, the majority leader. Democrats were perfectly appropriate, fair, and correct in asserting our rights. If this Senate is to work, the majority must allow it to work.
Thanks for listening. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without expressed written permission from FedNet is prohibited.